December 16th, 1944, the Ardennes forest, 5 in the morning. Buck Ellenson lay belly down in a foxhole, his fingers frozen around the trigger of his M1. He was 20 years old, from Savannah, Georgia. Private, 423rd Infantry Regiment, 106th Infantry Division. 4 months earlier, he'd been hauling sacks on the docks. Now he was on the German border, staring into a white wall that swallowed distance and sound. The shells came down before the mist lifted. You heard them late, as if the air had to decide whether to carry the noise. The ground bucked. Snow and dirt slapped the lip of the hole and sprinkled onto Buck's helmet. Sergeant Morrison was bellowing, "Fall back!" somewhere behind him, but Buck didn't move. He watched grey shapes sway in the fog, waiting for a clear order that never reached him. By the time his mind caught up, the shapes were already there. Germans in white camouflage, MP-40S raised, faces pale in the haze. A burst shredded Morrison's leg. Morrison dropped at Buck's feet. Buck bent to grab him, and a rifle butt cracked the back of Buck's skull. He woke on a truck with his hands tied, packed among men from his regiment. Cold air burned his throat. Someone was praying. Someone else was quietly vomiting. The road jolted, and every bump made his head ring. "It's because of you," a voice said near his shoulder. If Morrison hadn't waited, he wouldn't have taken that round. Buck said nothing. His head was slow. Words never came when he needed them. 5 days later, he was in Stalag IX-B. The Germans called it a number. The Americans called it the mud pit. Bread cut with sawdust, 100 grams a week. Broth that tasted like rust, with dead bugs floating. A number tattooed inside the left forearm. Buck's was 27,017, one less than Anthony Acevedo, the medic who would later fill diary after diary with the names of the dead. Buck landed in Barracks 3, the spot by the door where wind leaked through the cracks and snow drifted onto his face at night. Nobody made room. Kowalski, a platoon sergeant from Chicago with Polish blood and a voice like gravel, took one look at him and said, "That idiot stays away from the fire." Buck didn't argue. He curled into the corner and studied the one thing he still owned. His mother's photograph, taken in 1942, a week before he enlisted. She stood in front of their wooden house in Savannah, flower on her apron, looking straight at the camera like she was trying to look straight through it. The paper was already starting to curl from his hands, but he kept smoothing it flat, again and again. In January 1945, a new prisoner was dragged in. Private Kaminsky, so thin you could count his ribs. The guards made him kneel in the open space between bunks. His crime was eating leftovers from the trash heap. Everyone knew about the guard's pistol with wooden bullets, the forehead execution, but the guard chose a whip instead. The first lash made Kaminsky scream. The second opened him. The third left him twitching and silent. Men turned their heads away, pretending not to see, as if that could keep the pain from spreading. Buck stood up. Nobody called him. He walked forward, turned his back to the guard, and crouched in front of Kaminsky, covering the skinny man with his own shoulders like a wall. The whip hit Buck's back. Again. 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 Cloth tore. Blood seeped through. Buck didn't move. He kept his head down and said to Kaminsky, "Don't make a sound." On the 10th lash, Buck looked over his shoulder at the guard. His voice stayed calm. "Sir, he's almost dead. But I'm not." The guard stopped, breathing hard. Buck's face held no fear and no rage, just a steady, empty look, the way a post looks at wind. Up on the 3rd floor, a man lowered binoculars. Major Stein, the camp's psychological interrogator, said to his assistant, "That idiot is useful." Late January, Stein called Buck to his office. On the way, Buck passed an interrogation room with the door half open. A prisoner on his knees, Stein smiling behind a desk, chocolate in his hand. "What's your name? Where are you from? "Do you have a mother?" Stein asked, voice gentle as a neighbor's. Buck was taken into the next office. 10 minutes later, the other prisoner came out with tear tracks on his cheeks, as if the tears had been ordered and delivered on schedule. The man wouldn't meet anyone's eyes when the guard shoved him back down the hall. Stein sat across from Buck and slid a chocolate bar toward him. "Book, right? Savannah, Georgia. Dock worker. Only child. Widowed mother." Buck stared at the chocolate and said nothing. "I'm not here to interrogate you," Stein said. "Just to talk. The war is almost over. Savannah has surrendered." Buck's head lifted, quick as a flinch. Stein produced a newspaper dated February the 15th, 1945. The headline read, "Savannah Garrison Surrenders." Buck's fingers moved without permission and touched the edge of the paper, like he could feel home through ink. "Sign your name," Stein said, laying a pen beside the chocolate. "And tomorrow you go home. A simple statement. The war is wrong. The American army is the aggressor. Sign it and you ride a Red Cross train back to the United States." Buck's hand hovered. Paper, chocolate, pen. Then he looked into Stein's eyes. The smile never reached them. Buck pocketed the chocolate. He did not touch the pen. "Thank you, sir," he said, and left. Kowalski saw the bulge in Buck's pocket. That night, Buck's place by the fire was gone. Nobody explained. In Barracks 3, silence can starve a man as fast as hunger. Buck crouched in the corner with a bowl of soup so thin it reflected faces like dark glass. Kaminsky came over and lowered himself beside him. "Thank you," Kaminsky whispered. "For that day." Buck nodded, pulled out the chocolate, broke it in half and offered a piece. Kaminsky stared at it like it was a trap. "They gave you that." Buck nodded. "You didn't sign, did you?" Buck shook his head. Kaminsky stepped back anyway. He set his bowl down and walked away without drinking. In the middle of the barracks, he looked back once, as if he wanted to say something and didn't trust his own mouth. By morning, the barracks was whispering, "The idiot is a snitch." Late February, Stein summoned Buck again. This time there was coffee, white bread, more chocolate. Stein poured the coffee himself, like a host trying to make a guest forget he is locked inside a cage. "How is your mother?" he asked. "Any letters?" Buck shook his head. "I asked around," Stein said. "Savannah is under American control. Your mother is safe, but she needs you. You're her only son." Then softly, "Your buddies think you're a traitor. Do you think they'll let you live long enough to see the war end?" Buck's hand trembled. Stein set the pen in his fingers and pushed the form across the desk. Buck could not read all of it, but he recognized peace declaration and release. He saw his mother in the doorway with flour on her apron. He saw Kowalski's eyes. He saw Kaminsky's step backward. He remembered taking the whip, while everyone watched and nobody moved. "Go home," Stein said. Buck set the pen down. "My mother wouldn't let me sign," he said. For an instant, Stein's smile faltered. Then it widened. "Good boy. We'll talk again." Buck left without taking the bread, which felt like refusing a hand that wanted to drag him somewhere. March 1945 turned him into an island. No one spoke to him, no one met his eyes. He slept in the coldest corner with his mother's photograph pressed to his chest and his harmonica tucked beside it, metal and icy. He didn't dare play. If he played, he'd want home so badly, it would break him. Kowalski passed once and muttered, "Traitor. Does your mom know what you are?" Buck touched the curled edge of the photograph and said nothing. At night, he spoke to it in a voice only he could hear. "Ma didn't die today. Don't know about tomorrow." A 16-year-old guard named Hans sometimes sheltered under the barracks eaves to get out of the wind. He heard Buck's voice through the door crack and looked in once. A man curled in the corner, holding a photograph to the thin moonlight. a woman in an apron, smiling in front of a wooden house. Hans thought of his own mother in Cologne. Cologne had been bombed. He didn't know if she was alive. He walked away and pretended he hadn't heard anything because, if he admitted he'd heard it, he'd have to decide what it meant. Mid-March, Stein ordered Buck to clean the 3rd floor of the office building, a place prisoners were usually forbidden. At the end of the hall was a door marked Broadcast Room. No entry. The latch wasn't caught. A thin gap remained. Buck heard voices inside. "On Christmas Eve, we play Lili Marleen in every camp," someone said. "We dose the water, enough to push them into hypnosis, not enough to drop them." 20 suggestions embedded in the broadcast, each repeated 7 times, the oath on a second audio layer, so they think it's their own voice. Buck's broom clattered to the floor. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Stein stood there. "Did you hear that, Buck?" Buck didn't answer. Stein smiled, gentle and empty. "It's fine. You will sign. After Christmas Eve, you'll be on the first train back to Savannah." A few days earlier, Stein had made Buck clean a storage room beside the broadcast booth. Rows of filing cabinets sat there with labels, psychological evaluations, hypnosis logs, oath lists. Buck didn't touch anything. He only swept, eyes sliding sideways. One cabinet was ajar. Inside were stacks of identical forms, peace declaration and oath of allegiance. A signature line in the corner, some signed, some blank. On the signed ones, a red check mark beside the name. After that day, Buck didn't see those men again. Names that had been laughing, coughing, cursing in Barracks 3 simply stopped appearing. No one said where they went. No one asked out loud. Buck lay awake by the door and listened to the wind and tried not to picture a train going one way and a ditch going the other. That night, Buck pulled Kaminsky behind the barracks and whispered, "On Christmas Eve, don't drink the water, no matter what." Kaminsky's face tightened. "How do you know?" Buck couldn't explain. He only said, "Don't drink." "They say you're a snitch," Kaminsky said. "Are you?" Buck met his eyes. "I didn't sign." Kaminsky waited for more. There was nothing else. "If you didn't sign," Kaminsky said at last, "why does everyone say you did?" Buck watched him walk away without answering, because there was no answer that would fit inside the world they were living in. On April 14th, 1945, Christmas Eve, the camp grew strangely quiet. At supper, the guards ladled out extra soup with a shimmer of grease on top. Some men called it a gift. Some said Red Cross aid. The loudspeakers crackled, and the first notes of Lili Marleen began to rise like a curtain. Buck had heard the tune once back home in a Savannah bar, played by a German sailor on a battered accordion. Back then it had sounded like a cheap love song. Now it sounded like a hand reaching for the back of his neck. Buck didn't drink. He poured his soup into the dirt. Kowalski kicked the bowl aside. "A traitor doesn't deserve soup." Buck went back to his corner, pulled out his mother's photograph and stared at her smile until the music got louder, until it felt like it was filling the air inside his skull. Then he stood and walked toward the latrine behind the barracks where no one watched. He crouched by the wire and gripped his left ankle. He inhaled once, clamped his teeth and twisted. Bone snapped, pain exploded. He bit through his lip and tasted blood but made no sound. He lay in the snow shaking, then began to crawl. He dragged the broken leg behind him across the yard toward the broadcast building with the lit 3rd floor window. A dark smear marked his path. He kept moving, elbow by elbow, biting his tongue to stay awake. When he had no tongue left, he bit the inside of his cheek. The music grew louder, soft and sweet, the way a lullaby is soft and sweet when it's meant to make you stop resisting. Near the barracks door, he heard voices through the boards. Kowalski, sharp and angry. "Where's that idiot tonight?" No answer. Buck crawled past the door without looking up, because looking up would cost energy he didn't have. Snow stuck to his sleeves. Blood froze at the edges of his tracks and glittered in the moonlight like broken glass. At the barracks door, it opened. Kowalski stepped out and saw him in the snow. For a moment, both men froze. One standing, one crawling, a trail of blood between them. Kowalski didn't shout. He didn't step forward. He simply stared as if he had been struck and didn't know where the pain was. Then he turned and went back inside. Inside, he didn't go to his bunk. He stayed by the door with his hand on the wood, watching through the crack as the blood trail lengthened and moved toward the broadcast building, as if the trail itself were alive. Buck crawled on. He reached the broadcast building and collapsed at the edge of cleared concrete. The iron door was shut. A young guard stood beside it with a rifle hanging on his shoulder. Hans. Hans saw Buck's face, the twisted leg, the blood trail. He lifted the rifle. "Stop!" Buck kept crawling. "Stop, or I shoot!" Buck raised his head. His eyes were bright in the moonlight, bright in a way that didn't feel human anymore, like something pure pain had polished. He slipped his right hand into his jacket. Hans's muzzle wavered. Buck pulled out a photograph and held it up to the moon, a woman in an apron, smiling in front of a wooden house. "My mum," Buck rasped. Hans's rifle lowered. He thought of Cologne. He thought of his own mother, standing in a doorway, telling him to come back. His eyes filled. He turned his muzzle toward the ground and looked away. Buck whispered, "Thank you," without sound, and crawled past him into the stairwell. He hauled himself up the steps one at a time, scraping the broken leg behind him. Blood ran down and froze into dark edges. The music shook the stairwell walls. At the second landing, he stopped, pinned his shoulder to the wall and pinched his good thigh until stars burst behind his eyes. Then he kept going because stopping was the same as dying. On the third floor, light leaked through the broadcast room door. Inside, Stein's voice floated into the hall, warm as a sermon. "Soldiers, peace be with you on Christmas Eve. Soon you will go home. Now let us listen to Lili Marleen, this melody of peace." Buck pushed himself upright against the wall. He drew out his harmonica, metal warmed by his body, and limped toward the door on his good leg, leaving bloody footprints on the floor. He pushed the door open. Stein turned and saw him. For a second he stared. Then he smiled. "Buck," Stein said, with something like admiration. "You came. I knew you would." Buck didn't answer. He held the harmonica like a tool. "Do you know why I chose you?" Stein asked. "You're clean. Clean people are easiest to dirty. Your comrades are used to filth, but you, Buck, you have a weakness." Stein said the word as if it were a kindness. "Your mother." Stein nodded toward the camp outside. "You want to save the men who call you traitor? The ones who left you in the cold. Do they deserve it?" Buck's voice came out hoarse but steady. "I promised my mom I wouldn't be a bad man." Stein laughed. "Bad man? I'm trying to send you home. Sign, and you leave tomorrow. Your mother is waiting." Buck lifted the harmonica to his mouth. Stein's smile cracked. "Buck, don't." Buck blew one note. Not Lili Marleen, not a song. A raw, ugly scream forced through metal and lungs. The pain of a snapped leg, the snow, the blood, the kicked bowl, the whip. Months of silence breaking open at once. It was the sound of a man refusing to be turned into a mouth that recites what it's been fed. The sound tore through the broadcast and across the camp. Outside, men jolted upright. Kaminsky lurched to the doorway. Kowalski froze mid-breath as if he recognized something in that noise that he had been trying not to recognize. Stein lunged and punched Buck in the face. Buck went down. The harmonica skidded. Stein stomped it and ground it into the floor until it crushed. Shards cut Buck's skin. Blood spilled. Stein seized a metal rod and beat Buck in the corner. Buck curled around one thing, protecting it against his chest, his mother's photograph. He didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He only held. Then Stein straightened his collar, stepped back to the microphone, and spoke in the gentlest voice. "A minor technical issue. It has been resolved. Let us continue listening." Lili Marleen resumed. Outside, prisoners stood in the snow, staring at the blood trail leading into the building. Kaminsky's face went grey. He remembered Buck whispering, "Don't drink." He remembered stepping back from the offered chocolate. His stomach turned as if it were full of stones. Kowalski stared at the trail until something in him snapped. Kowalski moved first, then others followed. Dozens crossed the yard in silence, boots squeaking, breath steaming, eyes fixed forward. No one shouted, no one sang. Their anger had gone past heat into something colder and steadier. Hans stood at the door and watched the wall of men coming. He did not raise his rifle. When Kowalski stopped in front of him, Hans stepped aside. They surged up the stairs. On the third floor, Stein was at the microphone saying, "Now, let us take the oath. Repeat after me." The door flew open. Kowalski charged in, men behind him. They saw Stein and his script. Then they saw Buck in the corner, soaked in blood, harmonica crushed into glittering pieces. Buck's hands still clutched something. "Buck!" Kaminsky dropped to his knees. Buck's eyelids fluttered. He forced them open and saw Kaminsky's face. His mouth twitched. A little foam of blood clung at the edge of it. "Skinny," he breathed. Kaminsky grabbed his hand and felt the photograph there, smeared but still showing the woman in the apron. Tears fell onto the paper and mixed with blood until you couldn't tell which was which. Stein's eyes went cold. "This is a riot. By regulation, you can be shot on sight." Stein's hand went under the desk toward an alarm. Kowalski hit him. Once, then again. Stein fell with his chair. Kowalski climbed on top of him and kept swinging until other prisoners hauled Stein down and pinned him. A boot kicked the script away. The microphone stayed live. Outside, the yard heard fists, shouts, the crash of furniture. Someone yelled, "Carry him out!" Footsteps. Dragging. A door slamming. Silence. Then a voice came through the loudspeakers, hoarse and faint, but it reached every corner of the camp. "Ma, I'm coming home." Kowalski knelt beside Buck and watched his eyes close. The photograph slid from Buck's loosening hand. Kowalski caught it and held it tight like a confession. Kaminsky shook and shouted for a medic. Acevedo pushed through, knelt, and checked the damage. Shattered leg, internal bleeding, ribs driven into a lung, too much blood gone. He looked up and shook his head. Kowalski handed him the photograph. "Write it down," he said. "His name, his number, how he died." Acevedo opened his small notebook and wrote, 27,017, Buck Ellenson, 423rd Infantry Regiment, Savannah, Georgia, cause of death, broken leg, internal bleeding, ribs puncturing lung, exsanguination. Time, April 15th, 1945, 1:30 a.m. Note, he blew the harmonica. Acevedo closed the notebook and looked at Buck's face. Moonlight slid through the window and fell across it, turning the blood to dark shine. Buck's eyes were shut. At the corner of his mouth, the foam had dried into a thin crust, and in the pale light it almost looked like the beginning of a smile. "He smiled," Kaminsky said, as if he needed someone to agree with him. At the end, he smiled. Kowalski didn't answer. He only held the photograph tighter, because if he loosened his grip, he was afraid he would start shaking and never stop. Outside, snow kept falling. Someone began to hum, trying to find the shape of that shattered sound. Others joined. It wasn't in tune, but it held, and for a moment it felt like the camp was breathing together again. 3 days later, tanks from the U.S. Third Army tore through the wire. The prisoners stood in the yard staring at the stars and stripes as if the sight hurt their eyes. Some held small things in their hands, a photograph, a button, a strip of wire. Acevedo survived, notebook still against his chest, heavier now with names. Stein was captured. In an interrogation room, he told American officers, in the same soft voice, "I was only following orders." He survived the war, emigrated to the United States, changed his name, opened a bakery in Ohio. In 1972, he died in his own bed, family around him. Hans disappeared. Some said he fled back to Cologne. Some said the Soviets took him. Nobody knew. In autumn 1945, Kaminsky went to Savannah. He found the street and the wooden house with rose bushes out front. An older woman was watering them. Kaminsky showed her the photograph. "I served with your son," he said. She held the picture a long time, then looked into his eyes. "Did he suffer?" Kaminsky lied with all his strength. "No, we were with him." He smiled. She didn't make a sound when the tears came. They just slid down her face and disappeared into the collar of her dress. Kaminsky stood there with his hands hanging uselessly, wishing he could tell her the truth, and knowing the truth would be a second death. He noticed the sign by the porch, crooked on its nails, and read it twice to make sure his eyes weren't lying. Ellenson home. Waiting for Buck to come back. He stayed until the light thinned and the shadows stretched across the yard. When he finally walked away, he looked back once. She was still on the porch with the photograph in her hands, watching the street corner like she was waiting for footsteps that could still arrive. That corner was where she watched for 3 years. By the porch, a crooked sign still read, "Ellenson home, waiting for Buck to come back." In 1965, Acevedo's diaries were made public. On one page he wrote that Buck should be remembered, that he died beneath the broadcast tower after breaking the brainwashing with a harmonica, that his comrades lived and he did not. People later went looking for Buck's mother, but the house had been torn down. A gas station stood there. Neighbors said the old woman had died after years of sitting on the porch, watching the street. In 1972, in a small town in West Germany, an old man told his grandson, "I let an American go. He held up a picture of his mother. I looked at it and thought of my own mother, and I let him go." The old man could not remember the American's name, only the apron and the smile. In 1985, in a bar in Savannah, an old man played a harmonica badly, the same broken fragment every time. Asked what it was, he said, "Don't know. Some idiot taught me." In 2010, Acevedo's diaries were translated into German and displayed at the Frankfurt Book Fair. A young German man photographed page 47 and sent it to a friend in America. The friend asked who Buck Ellenson was. The reply came back, "I don't know, but he should be remembered. Buck had no headstone. He was buried in a mass pit with hundreds of others." In the 1960s, the land was redeveloped into a supermarket. The parking lot covered the nameless. But people remembered. Kowalski lived to 88. Before he died, he told his grandson, "The worst thing I ever did was call an idiot a traitor. He was the best of us." Kaminsky played a harmonica once every Christmas Eve, trying to find that broken tune. He never played it well, but he always played it to the end. Acevedo kept writing names for 12 years, and one page was Buck. And the melody? No one knew what it was called, but when someone hummed it, off-key, broken, enough to make the eyes burn, that was it. It drifted out of a snowy night on April 15, 1945, out of a harmonica crushed under a boot, and it drifted on to wherever someone still remembered. The bells of Savannah did not ring, but someone heard them anyway.